Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. If you're paying attention, you know that you only make money when you work. It might be great money, but it's dependent on you. The information on this podcast will help you solve that. We interview experts and provide analysis into financial freedom through commercial real estate. Why? To help physicians like you thrive. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. This is your host, Dr. Michael McManus, and today we're here to talk about burnout and why it's important to begin your financial journey early. Now, you don't have to go far out there to find information about compounding interest. And, there's quotes from Einstein even that say, it's the eighth wonder of the world. And this is all very important because the sooner you start saving money and building your financial future, the longer that money has to grow and the more it will grow into. Now, as physicians, this is actually one of our biggest challenges because you don't start making money till you're much older in life. And, sometimes you feel old, but you're not really that old when you finish residency. But the reality is, if you compare it to our peers who today there are kids, I know kids who are finishing high school and doing a sub 1 year technical training program and going into the trades and making $100,000 a year before they're 19 years old. Now, these kids, if they never bring on a high standard of living until they develop some passive income and they put that money in the way and they watch it grow, they're going to be so far ahead of kids who went to college that those kids may never catch up. And then, so you go the next step to the college grads. These are the people that as doctors, we went to school with the kids in high school and some kids went to work. And back then when I finished high school, going to college was the way to a better income. That's not even a given thing anymore, but the kids go to college and then start working. So they're gainfully employed at 22. Whereas doctors, now we've got another 4 years of medical school. So even compared to nurses do 2 years of undergrad. Now a lot more, are being pushed to have a bachelor's degree, but an RN with a 2-year degree can still make $70,000 a year or more with only 2 years of training. So again, we're playing catch up because if they start saving money, then we're talking, close to a decade before we go to work. After then, 4 years of college, if you get it done in 4, and then 4 years of medical school, and then residency, which is 3 to 6 years at a fellowship, could be 8. So by the time most of us started working, you're at least 30 years old, if not into your early 30s. So we could be a decade or more behind our peers in this financial planning. Now, the second part that's tough with that is this whole time you've been a student. And as a student, you don't make much money. And so it's usually a pretty lean time in life. So you have this delayed gratification and everybody's like, oh yeah, you're going to be a doctor. You're going to make so much money. And it's hard to not believe that. So as soon as you start making money, it's like, okay, now I can start living this lifestyle. I've been living this Spartan student resident lifestyle while watching my peers who are now established professionals living a better lifestyle. You're ready to start spending and go on vacation and have a nicer car and a bigger house. Well, none of these things also, they're all pulling money away from money that gets invested to grow. So this is part of that balance. So it's a tough journey from the start in many ways. And depending how well they invested their money before, I'm talking about our peers, that it can be hard for us to catch up. Now, once you become a doctor, now you're a junior physician at the hospital or in a practice. You're the new guy and you're trying to not be a schlep. And so the idea that, you're still putting a lot of work into learning your craft, into growing professionally. So even then you don't have the time to put into your financial planning. One of the groups I'm in, there's a gentleman who's a retired firefighter. And, we were talking about this and he was talking about how to go and become a firefighter. I believe the training is like a year before you go into the firehouse. And then they work some crazy shifts that are like 12 on, 12 off, but then they get a bunch of days in between. And I can't say exactly the shift they work, but in the end, for working for a major metro fire department, they make a good living, but they also have a lot of time to do financial planning, to invest, to research their investments. And this is different from doctors. So once doctors start making money, they're still very busy, and it's tough to have the time and the mental, physical, emotional energy, the bandwidth to really take care of these investments. So that becomes the next challenge. And then as you're working so hard, because the amount of time you spend in the hospital, your network can be very small because you're not out meeting people, you're not talking to people, which decreases your access to information and access to people who can help you grow your net worth. And this goes back to, we've talked about the book before, the who, not how. The time and energy it requires to learn something versus finding people who already know that can move you along that track. Now, the other thing that gets hard, because I ran into this, like, I think it was the day after I graduated from medical school, I get some call from a stockbroker who's like, "Oh, you're a doctor now." And I'm like, "Hey, you don't understand. I just graduated. I'm in debt. I'm going to residency now to make essentially like $4 an hour." So people assume you're making money. And then it can be hard sometimes to be like, "Hey, listen, we don't have money." And they're like, "What do you mean? You're a doctor." So you're not meeting people. There's all these assumptions that are made, and it's really easy to slide into just doing the standard investments. And especially now that most docs are employed, the hospitals have a 401k program. And pretty much it's really easy to then, once you have investable money, for it all to get herded into the stock market and be managed by money managers. Now, not everybody had the experience I did, but as I went back through and looked, I found interesting things in my brokerage statements. The one I'd look and I'd say, okay, the S&P 500 went on some big runs during this time. And let's say for a 6-month period, the S&P was up, 10, 15%. And then I'd look at my statements and say, oh, look, my investments only went up 5 or 7%. So it was behind the S&P 500. And the brokers would, the money managers would tell me, well, that's because we're in a conservative thing and we want to divest and all this other stuff. And so I got one number that said how much my stuff had grown in their analysis. But I went back and said, okay, how much money was in it 6 months ago and how much money is in it now, aside from the money I've contributed? And the average growth was typically 4 to 5%, 5.5%. And that was because a lot of where they had put the money in our 401ks and some of these managed accounts were in a series of mutual funds. And this was all part of diversification, and you can get different stuff and it's built for different timelines. But even some of those mutual funds the fund was a collection of different mutual funds that might even have more inside of that. And so although the stocks and the funds went up, after all the fees were taken out, it nibbled off another significant portion of my returns. So although I was saving money and putting in, and my advisors were like, look how much your wealth is growing. Well, most of it was what I was putting in and it wasn't growing on its own. And so once I started down the alternative journey was really once I headed into burnout. And this is the whole point of this podcast, because kind of the lead up to here is all the standard reasons for why to start early. And it's the time value of money. So the earlier you start saving that money, the more it has to grow. And all the reasons that doctors are disadvantaged because you don't start earning money till a decade later. And then even once you're done, you don't really have the time to put into learning these things compared to other professions. So it can all make it very difficult. Well, now, if you head down the standard pathway, which I think most of us did, you're kind of mostly in the stock market, maybe bonds, they're managed funds, and they underperform, and they incredibly underperform. And then what happens is doctors tend to go out and start investing in things that have high risk for failure. And that's because people pitch them to us. We get pitched medical startups. I can't tell you how many, we've got this great thing. And I've looked at some of them, and some of them, I loved their technology. I loved their results. but I wasn't so sure. And I'm glad I didn't invest because it never made it to market, which is something that I think it probably should have, but the market didn't agree. But we'll invest in things like that that tend to lose money instead of having a good solid strategy of where we're going, or saying, okay, if I want to be an angel investor, I'm going to put, this is how much money I'm going to put in, and I need at least 10 different investments because maybe one of them will hit. That's a whole different type of investing in venture capital. And venture capital funds also can not tend to do so well. But again, the whole point here is we start seeing that we're not having these gains and head off down these paths that are highly promoted. Put your money here. So this can make it very difficult. And then for people like me, when I got serious about finding alternative investments was when I was going through burnout and having this realization, like, I'm not going to be able to do this until I'm 70, 75. I had partners who worked into their 70s because they loved it. Not everybody makes it that far. And when I realized that I wasn't going to make it that far, and I started looking for alternative investments, and that's really what led me to real estate, is it's much harder once you're in that burnout state. And, the more I learn about burnout is kind of just like I'm not an expert here. I'm not a psychiatrist, but it's like forced depression, that you're going in and this job is just stealing your soul and it's beating you down. And so in that state, it's harder to learn new things. It's harder to have creative problem solving. And it's easier to now just settle into being some sort of generalist in your doctor profession where you go to work and you turn the patients out and you take decent care of them. But it doesn't require a whole lot of mental activity. And then some people just grind away there for years until they finally retire. And for me, that just wasn't living. So it was like, I need to find something else. And so this is really what this is about. Is I really encourage anybody out there, especially if you're a high earning professional, a high earning W-2, most of those jobs tend to take a toll, whether you're a doctor or not. And while you're still in a good mental space, before you burn out, before you get older and more tired, before you hit menopause or andropause and get the brain fog that goes with it, that's the time to start learning other things and building things. So, and I don't know how much this fits with, I keep hearing talks at hospitals about burnout and moral injury and compassion fatigue. And a lot of it's real, but like a lot of things we all know as doctors, what's going on in academia and what you can study and make a study out of often doesn't apply to real life very well. And a lot of the stuff I've seen on burnout is all well and good if you never consider any other options. And maybe that's the big thing for a lot of doctors is once you're in doctoring, it's hard to consider throwing a career away and changing and doing something else, which a lot of other professions do because you've got so much time and energy and so much delayed gratification. And then all the science you see coming out, none of it talks about how do I exit this profession? Maybe 20 years was enough. And that's what for me is it took hiring a coach to work through burnout who was not an academic or in the health system, was a high performance coach. And it kind of gave me the okay to say, listen, you've been doing this for 20 years. You've treated a lot of cancer. You've helped a lot of people. You've done your fair share. It's okay to walk away. Don't feel like emotionally you've got a commitment to society that you still have to fulfill. You've done your part. And it's also okay to enjoy life, to work part-time, to just work locums. I've met some younger docs now who sign like a 2 or 3 year contract, and then they'll take 6 months off. So every 2 years, they take 6 months off between getting a new job and getting a new signing bonus. And I was like, nice. That's another way that when I started was just not an acceptable way to practice medicine. And part of that was that when you were in private practice and you had to build a practice, it took years to build a practice. I've opened up one practice on my own, and it took a good 3 years to hit a baseline. So, so if you're opening a business, it takes a while to get going. Or if you bought a practice and you paid a bunch of money for it, it took a while to recapture your investments. You couldn't just shift. So with this transition where a lot of docs are employed, and it's kind of what's part of the burnout from my experience, even though I was never employed, but it sure felt like it when you're kind of dealing with one healthcare system, is that you still have all the responsibility to the patients. And now there's even this increase. You have this responsibility to practice cost-effective medicine. But at the same time, you've got all the responsibility, but they've taken away so much of your control and your power. You can't say, I want to change the way I work. I want to change the way we do this. Nope. That all has to go through 3 layers of management and bureaucracy. And it's almost impossible to see meaningful change. And then when there's change, it's some big corporate initiative where they hired a consultant and there's a big hoopla about rolling it out and nothing really changes. Or if it does, it just gets worse. So there's that difference. So as long as you're dealing with all that, I'll quit rambling and get back to the topic here. But as long as you're dealing with all that, some of the advantages to being employed is mobility. You see a lot of younger docs now who change jobs on a regular basis. And it's more about moving and if you have a family and all those things, but it allows some other opportunities to do things different than they were traditionally. And you'll still hear doctors poo-poo other doctors like, oh, you can't do that. That's not right. I can't tell you how many times I heard about the way somebody was living their life wasn't right because it didn't fit into somebody else's perception of what a doctor should be and how a doctor should be. If you're struggling, don't listen to those people. If you want to do a 1-year contract and take time off, a 2-year contract and take time off, that's great. Or, right now, it's a lot of specialties are hard enough up with employment. Tell them I'm looking for a 3-day-a-week job. What can you pitch me there? So all of these things are the way that I look at burnout now, because these are some of the things I had to figure out along the way of how do I change the way I work, that it's not stealing my soul anymore. And this took time, and it took so long. And part of it taking so long is that while you're burnt out, nothing happens efficiently. It doesn't happen efficiently in your brain. It doesn't happen efficiently emotionally, because that burnout's like that dark cloud that makes it hard to get excited because there's just this thing that's beating you down. And so again, this comes back to the start early. Any younger docs, younger professionals, even if you still love what you do, prepare. The world changes. So I would tell people, assume that maybe you won't love it so much in 5 to 10 years, and you're going to be looking for a change. If you knew that in 10 years you were going to hate this job, or like an NFL athlete in 10 years, you're not going to be able to physically do it anymore. So maybe it's going to be, you're not going to be able to emotionally do it anymore. How would you plan your future from that perspective, that there may be some big shift? And if you start planning from that perspective and you get there, now you're ready to make a change. You're ready to, the big corporate word, you're ready to pivot. But if you don't, when you hit that point, it gets really hard. I think the first time I heard it was from Brendan Burchard, who's a high performance guy, was like, change will come, and change can either be directed by you or change can be directed by the world. And when it's directed by you, it tends to go a lot better for you than if the world is forcing you to change. So again, this all goes back to starting early. Now, if you're starting early in real estate investing, what are the things you can do to start early? And we've talked about this in a lot of the podcasts. One is getting your education. There's some great books. There's great podcasts. There's audiobooks. There's your core learning. I would compare this to the first 2 years of medical school. It's just kind of the stuff you got to put in your head before you really start to learn. Once you get that far, then you can start to do some early deal analysis. And there's a place that now it's time to jump in. Now, jumping in, you can join a mastermind, you can join an investment group, go to meetings and meet other people. If you can find a group that you do this all with, that's great, because you're going to get a lot further in a group than you are on your own. That way you can kind of divvy up some of your research. You can learn from the other people. But then you got to get started. And that really comes down to, you got to buy something. Do the best you can. Start small. And that way, if you mess it up, you can learn from it at a low price. If you like doing this stuff on your own and you have the time, which time is always the big constraint, that's great. There's processes out there to learn that. I would encourage anybody going that route to learn to delegate as quickly as possible. If you like doing maintenance on rentals and it's kind of a Saturday, go to the wood shop type of relaxation, great. But otherwise, find a handyman, a handy person to do that work. Find a property manager who does all the stuff and just sends you a check. Often probably a misperception is that when I bought my first multifamily rental, I wanted to do all the stuff because I wanted to learn it so I could identify a good property manager. In the end, I think I would have been better to just start interviewing and hiring property managers and have them ask them questions. Tell me why you're a good property manager. I would have learned a lot more about property management a lot faster, but more importantly, I would have learned to evaluate property managers and have them doing the property management. And then I have more time to, one, live my life, but to put my real estate time into finding good deals and learning and learning more about scaling up rather than doing the baseline work, because there you're going to move faster. And once you get in, you're going to start moving faster. Then as far as if you don't want to be active and you're going to invest passively, it's meeting people again. There's so much. It's, going to conferences is a great place to meet a lot of sponsors all in one place. And they're all trying to sell you something. And, it's a chance to ask them questions and learn. Get on the phone with different sponsors. There's a ton of people raising capital on LinkedIn and Facebook now. I think a lot of doctors are reluctant. They don't want to be sold, and maybe they feel like they're being sold all the time, but they need you as much as you need them. And just have conversations until you find somebody that you mesh well with, and then begin investing. And if the numbers are high, if they've got high minimums of like 100,000 or 50,000, ask if you can start lower. So say, I'm looking to find a partner to invest with repeatedly over many years, but I want to see how they work first. I want to be on your investor calls. I want to see how everything works from the inside with some money in the game. Can I do a $20,000 or $25,000 initial investment? If I like it, these are kind of the numbers I plan on doing in the future. Most sponsors will take that for a recurring investor, is another way to get started. And once you get started, you start building a network, because the people will introduce you to other people, especially if you ask. As that network grows, this kind of goes back to one of the shows we just did about networking. You're just going to learn that much more. And when you have a question, you're going to have that many more people to go to answer the question. So in conclusion, reasons to get started early. One, it's that time value of money. Two, if you don't make a point of it as a doctor, it's really easy to be pushing 40 before you really get serious about your investments. Don't wait until you're burnout or super frustrated to start looking at something more than the stock market. I really think if you assume you've got a 10-year lead on your profession while you still love it, and start building an exit plan. If you don't need that exit plan, great. But when you hit that point that you're like, I don't know if I can do this anymore, if you're prepared to become work optional at that point, it's a great place to be. If anybody has any questions, want to discuss this more, please reach out. I'd love to have talks with different docs about this, because it helps me learn. It also helps me see where other doctors are at on their journey, so we can help provide good information for you, because that's what we're trying to do here at Surgeon Syndicate. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. This has been an episode of Surgeon Syndicate. If you got value from this episode, other surgeons are hungry to become job optional, and you can help them by sharing this content today. Schedule a call and we can make a plan. Looking forward to having you with me on the next episode.